So recently, you said China's economy is reaching escape velocity. What does that mean?
So basically, if you think about it, and actually I had some physics nerds on Twitter beat me up that what I really should have said was event horizon, not escape velocity. So
That's impossible. Physics nerds can't beat up anyone.
So be careful of those physics nerds. So what we mean by that is the problems in China, as we've all talked about, and with you a couple of times over history, all the problems in the Chinese economy as they've progressively gotten worse. Basically, their choices have become narrower and narrower, and so basically they've reached escape velocity in the sense that they cannot go back and reform their economy to correct these issues. They're going to have to accept the pain. And so basically it's a choice now between, do you want a really, really bad choice or a catastrophic choice?
So when the physics nerd said you actually meant to event horizon, you're saying that China is about to be sucked into an economic black hole.
To a degree, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's basically just how severe are those problems going to be? And I should say I'm not a believer in the crisis scenario. I think it's much more likely that there will just be really severe problems that the CCP works to make sure that there is not a crisis. But that does not mean that everything is going well. It's just it's not good, but it's not necessarily a crisis.
Well, can we talk about a few of those individual economic problems China's facing? Maybe let's start with real estate. That seems to be the biggest one, or one of the biggest.
Yes. So basically, real estate in China, to start off with, is wildly overvalued. I was just looking at these statistics yesterday. As a country, on average, Chinese, what a good easy metric to look at, real estate values is home values in China are roughly 25 times what income is. Okay.
Wow.
If you think about, I don't know what New York is. I know San Francisco is about 15. Like Paris is 20. If you look at it as a country, the United States is about 5 times income. Okay, so the average income might be about $100,000, and the home price would be $500,000 or something like that, as a simple scenario. In China, the urban value of income is about, let's say, a little over 1 million RMB, and the urban income is 40,000. Okay, so that pencils out at about a little above 25 to 30 times the income. And so that just makes it really hard for people to buy real estate in China. And one of the things that we've seen in the past couple of years is everybody talks about the market in China, but basically there's so few transactions going on in China that there almost is no market. And so, for instance, if you look at it, China, in the United States, most homes will sell on average about every, let's say, 6 to 8 years, depending, because that data can be kind of noisy. But in the United States, homes will sell on average every 6 to 8 years. Okay. Right now, the number of transactions taking place in China mean that it would take almost 50 years for every home in China to sell once. That's how few transactions there are. So when we talk about the market, there really isn't a market in the sense that you could go and sell your home in China. Okay.
Right. So that means that if you invested your entire life savings into an apartment in Beijing or something, like you might still not be able to sell it, so you can never get your money out, and then your money is gone.
Yes, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. And so one of the things, there's on Chinese social media, there's actually been messages passed around where people, for whatever reason, they just want to walk away from a mortgage. And so they're trying to actually give real estate away, and they can't do that. And so people have taken to, there's official sanctioning of selling homes at beneath certain price levels and things like that. So, there's jokes around that, we're not changing the value of real estate because you'll buy one, you'll get two free. Okay, you'll buy one, get one free for apartments or something like that. So you're not actually changing the price of the real estate, but we're making a deal where you buy one, get one free.
Why can't the government allow people to change the price of the real estate?
So a couple of reasons. The primary reason is they're honestly very and deeply and rightfully scared of Chinese homeowners. One of the most common reasons on public demonstrations, gatherings, that I forget the exact term that they use for protests in China, but one of the most common reasons for those is basically developers trying to sell homes at beneath the price that other people bought in that development or in that building or in the general neighborhood bought for. That's one of the most common reasons. There's also the very real reason for governments is that this affects their tax revenue. On average, about 30% of government revenue in China comes from land sales. So the government oversees a city, a county, whatever, and they actually sell with something like anywhere from typically about a 50 to 100 year lease to a developer to build on that property. And so one of the things people don't understand is that when a Chinese buyer buys an apartment or a home in China, and it depends on different cities and things like that, but on average, about 50% of that purchase price is actually effectively a tax that goes to the government. And this is a fact that the Chinese home buyers are very well aware of. And so one of the questions that has always been is, why don't local governments go to a more sustainable tax base and do things like implement a property tax or things like that? The very common example is in a lot of the United States, it's very common to have something around a 1% property tax. So that if you, for instance, have a $500,000 home, you would pay a $5,000 yearly tax to the city or county or something like that to pay for schools, other things like that. In China, they've basically already got that payment up front, and it's typically been a very large number. So if you, for instance, buy, the average price in China for a home right now is about 1 million RMB. So if you pay 1 million RMB for a home, and 50% of that goes to the government, that's probably about a $75,000 tax that goes to the government before you've even moved in. Okay. And so this is one of the reasons the government has found it very difficult to implement property taxes. The government is, as land sales have collapsed in China, that's creating an enormous problem for the local governments. So the local governments have a very vested interest in keeping those property values high so that they can continue to sell land to the developers to build more developments, even if nobody lives there. And so this gets into one of the bigger overall themes that we kind of touched upon earlier, is that the choices that governments at the local level, at the central level have are increasingly bad options.
Well, so I think this is important. Is this happening because, it's just one of those things that happens in a country where things, over time get a little chaotic, or is this situation the result of specific communist policies by the government?
So this is actually this is directly a result of the communist policies. After the 2008 global financial crisis, and this is 15 years ago now, I moved to China in 2009, and China was unleashing a massive stimulus at the time to keep everybody employed out of the global financial crisis. In fairness, the United States also released a stimulus package out of the global financial crisis, and that stimulus package amounted to about 1% of U.S. GDP at the time. China's stimulus package amounted to roughly 10% of GDP at the time. And I remember very clearly in, I think it was 2010, maybe 2011, I have to go back and check the exact date. I remember very clearly, I was relatively very new to China, living in China, and I remember reading the local paper and seeing that new debt issuance by banks had tripled year over year. Okay, not 3%, not 30%, had tripled year over year. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, wow, this is not going to end well at some point. Okay, and basically for the past since the global financial crisis, Chinese debt has just absolutely exploded, just absolutely exploded.
And so this is why you say it's like an event horizon. It has reached that point where you can't escape the pull of the black hole.
Yes, you absolutely cannot. And so, the example I would use is, let's assume that you're in your 40s and okay, you're a few pounds overweight, and your doctor says, you know what, you should start exercising. And you come back in a couple of years and you've still enjoyed a few more donuts and hamburgers than you should have, and so you're a little bit more overweight. And as this goes on, at some point your doctor is going to tell you, you know what? Look, the only option for you is a quadruple bypass. You can't go exercise. You'll have a heart attack. Okay. China has reached that point where the only options left are bad options. You may have heard in China world and in economic pundit world, people saying things like, well, China needs to just stimulate households more. And that's actually reasonable. And China has actually released some policies in the real estate area where I'll get to in a second, which actually kind of try to move that forward a little bit. But it's really hard because Chinese households are now so wildly indebted that that they're incredibly constrained. They can't go out and buy real estate. Okay, they can't do a lot of these things because of how severe the underlying problems are.